What's up guys, Sean Astrom here. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can properly spread around trees and plants using Cinema 4D's native MoGraph tools onto a height map. In this case, we're going to use CG terrain. So let's dive in and do it. So here I am in Cinema 4D, and the first order of business is to start out with a nice plain primitive object. And by default, I like to work at a pretty large size, but not crazy, 5,000 by 5,000. And then for segments, we're going to do 256 by 256 for the time being. Now, I kind of walked through this a little bit in my other video, how to start out with CG terrain, but I'm just going to kind of go through these steps again for anyone that is just diving into this now. I like to bring in a figure and change the scale of this guy by 1/10. So I'll just go to the coordinates section, shift select these guys and type in 0.0 here, and if you hold down the control key, that will scale those uniformly. And so this is just kind of roughly how I like to get going. So I'll hide that guy for now. And we're going to call this our render terrain, and then we are going to do a, let's see here, let's call this our viewport terrain. And so what we're going to do is generate a bit of terrain for Redshift and then some terrain here for our viewport. And so I will hide the render terrain here and reveal it to be shown here. Render visibility, we want that on, and viewport visibility, we are setting this to off. So, and then here we're going to do the opposite, and that should be good. So the next thing we need to do is bring in a, where the heck is it? Displacer. Pop that in here underneath our viewport terrain. And I'm going to fire open my asset library here. I think that's what it's called. Is that what they're calling it these days? No, it's the asset browser. Okay. And we're going to hop into CG terrain, and I have these loaded up. And yeah, if we're going to use, if you head on over to my website here, sastudios.xyz, out of alien terrains, CG terrain, we're going to use, let's see here, probably this guy. And this is O3B. So let's find that here, O3B. And what we are going to do is put this into a list mode here. And what we want to do, I don't know why that disappeared. I think that's a weird bug. Interesting. Maybe it's not a bug, but as I selected this displacer, this kind of disappeared on me. No worries though. So I want the shading field to be open here. Click back over here. And I'm going to bring in this, let's see here, O3B. Yeah, that's the one. 4K. Drag that into our displacement here. And let's hide this. And then we're going to crank this up. We're going to set this to regular intensity. The default is intensity centered. Let's put in a value of 800 here. And let's zoom out a little bit. I'll hide my render view for the time being. And we can see kind of already what we're getting. And that's pretty dope. But I want a little more resolution in this guy. So we're going to actually go 512 by 512. And I think that is looking much nicer. So one of the things that's interesting about these height maps is they are an EXR format, and the height map data is only in the red channel. And the displacer, for whatever reason, it actually is only displacing this at 1/3 of this value. So let's actually set this to 1,000. Actually, let's go 1,200. This is kind of interesting. So with our render terrain geometry, let's just do this here. We're going to bring in a Redshift standard material. I'm going to go into my node editor here, select this guy, and we're going to set this to Lambertian spheres, reflection. Let's crank up the roughness, and back to our asset browser. And let's bring in this color map here. And yeah, so this is the 4K map, and we'll bring this into here. And then let's go here and bring in the height as well. So this is the same height map that we have over in our displacer, just here in the node editor for Redshift materials. And we need to double click in here and bring in a displacement node, plug this guy right here into the texture text map input, and plug this into, not volume, displacement. Okay, so this is the very basic setup for this material, and we'll throw this onto our viewport. So we're getting the material there, and also we'll make a copy of it here. If I also select material here and go to the viewport tab here, I can change the texture preview size to like 2K, and that will give us a much better view of all of this lovely detail that we get with these maps. So what I was talking about earlier, the displacement only working in the red channel, if we go ahead and add a Redshift tag, Redshift object tag to our render terrain, I'm going to go to geometry, enable tessellation and displacement right here. So I'm going to drop this a minimum edge length down to 0, and we're going to set this first subdivision to 1. Actually, we'll just set this to 0, and then let's also match, let's go 512, 512, and back to this tag. So what I want to do is I want to set the displacement here in the shader at the, I want to leave this essentially at the scale of 1, and inside of the tag here, I want to match this. But since this is actually 1/3, where are we at here? Object height, since this is actually, again, using only one channel, it's 1/3 of the height here. So let's just go, we can punch in 1200 divided by 3. And that gives us 400. And then we want the maximum displacement to be above this. And lastly, let's bring in this initial setup, I suppose. Let's bring in a dome light, fire up the asset browser here again. And I'm going to hop into here. I have some new HDRIs coming out soon, so keep an eye out for these guys. But this is one called Surreal Sunsets, and we're going to throw that into our texture here. Let's go with, I think this 07, Surreal Sunset 07 4K. We can pop that in here. Now these are just the quick ones, and you'll notice we got 4K here, but they actually max out at 18K. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. They're coming soon. But yeah, so we got a nice dome light. Let's see here. Some lovely sunset action. And I just fired up the render view. And look at that. Out of the box, things are matching up. This is great. I can zoom into this peak here, and we can see how perfectly that aligns. If I'm going to go here to Safe Frames, enable that, this should match our render view. And yeah, you can see that how accurate that is. So essentially what we're doing is we have our viewport terrain and then our render time terrain. And by working this way, we can get a nice kind of low res preview in our viewports. We get crazy, 300 frames per second in the viewport. And then at render time, we can, add some subdivisions. We can add a couple right now. Let me go to my HDRI and crank up the exposure a little bit. Let's go 2. And you can start to see here what kind of detail we'll get. Yeah, so very nicely detailed. And again, this is just subdividing it a couple times, but the more we subdivide, the more detail we will get. But what I've found with Redshift, if we leave this at 0, so it's not doing any subdividing at render time, we get incredibly nice real-time interactive feedback. So this is the very basic setup here. Wanted to run through it one more time before we start to scatter some plants all around this here in a few seconds. But I want to change out this HDR. I'm not in love with this one for this scene. Let me see what this one's looking like. 09. Now, one thing that's great, you can also just cycle through these here by changing the numbers here. So they are just kind of numbered accordingly, and you can just go through the collection here by just changing out those numbers, which is actually kind of my preferred method. And this is cool. This is very nice looking, but I want something with a little more hard shadow kind of detail. So we have another collection called High Noon, and man, that is a weird thing that I'm dealing with here. When I select an object here, this is going away. I don't know what's going on there. That might be a little bug. All right, so here we have High Noon 1. You can see how bright this is. So let's drop this down to 0. There we go. This is kind of what I'm wanting here for this. So this is looking sweet. And yeah, let's start scattering some plants around this. So in the past, the workflow has kind of been, you would maybe scatter a bunch of geometry on your viewport geometry. But this is very limiting in that it doesn't give you that much precision in terms of the tree or plant or rock placement. And so what we really want to do is we want to be able to scatter, our objects around this terrain, but have that map being driven by all of our lovely texture maps that come with CG terrain here. So let's see here. We are in Alien Terrain 03B. So we actually want to use this height map here to drive the height of our trees or plants. So I am going to bring in, I believe I have a little proxy tree I made here. And that might not be loaded up in the asset browser. So you know what? Let's just make one real quick. Pull up a new tab here or a new project. And this is good because this will show you guys kind of the process for building this stuff out yourself. So we're just going to do super low poly little tree here. Something like that. Let's make it editable. And then we can, I don't know, let's just delete these bottom faces. Actually, let's delete these edges or dissolve them. If you don't hold down Control and Delete, that will dissolve those. And then we can right click here and let's go Inset. And I don't know, something like that. And then if I hold down Control and pull this guy down, we'll get a nice little quick tree proxy. But one thing we definitely want to do is go to a side view here. And in my, let's see here, in my access mode, I want to align this here to the bottom of the tree. So I'm just going to eyeball this for right now. You could also, you could go into the move tool and adjust these guys here, but this is good. So L is the shortcut too for access mode, axis rather. It's a nice hotkey to remember. And then let's just go here. Let's call this tree. I'm going to get rid of this stuff. We don't need any tags on this. Put the coordinates up to 0. And that's our proxy tree. So we're going to pop this into our scene. And right away we can see that it's way too large. So we'll just make it about yay big. And we want to bring in, you would think maybe a cloner, but we're actually going to use this matrix scatter. Now this is essentially just a matrix object, but using Redshift's amazing particles ability. So it's pretty awesome how quick this is. So I guess what we can do first is let's go to a top view and let's hide our viewport. And we want to match our matrix object here to the size of these. So if you remember 5,000, let's go, now not the count, we want to do the size. Let's see here, let's switch it to endpoint, 5,000, 5,000. And you can see we get a nice little representation of our grid here. So we have a count 40 by 40 by default, but let's go 200 by 200. And you can see that that gives us a nice, grid of trees. And if I select my RS tag here, and instead of optimize spheres, let's put in custom objects. We're going to put this little tree in here. Let's go to our render view here and fire that up and see what we're getting. We should probably hide our render terrain as well. And as you can see, we have our little trees, and that's looking good. All right, so I want to maybe add a little bit of quick color to this. So let's go to the tab here and just put in some color. Something like that is cool. Now you're probably thinking, well, why would I not just use this in object mode and scatter them onto a copy of the geometry? Well, remember, that's because we want to get the maximum amount of detail, or accuracy rather, for these trees to be placed or plants to be placed along our terrain. So in order to do that, we are going to select our matrix object here. We're going to go to the effectors tab, and we are going to add in this magical shader effector. I'm going to disable my render view for now. So by default, the shader effector is set to scale, and we want to set it to position. And we're going to bring in another copy of the height map. So if you click on this little arrow and go up to bitmaps, since it's already one we need that's already in the project. Sorry, it's getting cut off the record window there, but we're just going to bring in the height here, back to the parameter tab, and crank this up in the Y. Now, I do not know what the heck is going on, but there is a weird bug here. If I clear this out and then hit the undo button, yeah, so I just hit the undo button there. So if I clear that out and hit the undo, it's loading up. There's something fishy about this, the way this is being loaded into the shader effector. So forgive me for that. I think I might have to be reporting this one to Maxon. But as you can see here with our matrix objects here, if I set that value to 1200, now remember, so since Cinema is reading this height file at 1/3, so it's just this weird thing, and we got to remember. So in our object ID here, or sorry, on the terrain, this guy, remember we got 400 here, and in my shader effector, I want to match what I'm getting here in my viewport here. So 1200, and so shader effector, Y, we're going in the Y direction, so we want to match that at 1200. So this is looking really good. But as you can see, yeah, we are matched exactly to the terrain here. And the beautiful thing about this is we're not depending on any underlying geometry. We're driving these trees by the height map here inside the shader effector. And so when I want to bump this up to the 16K version, I can simply just hop in here, type in 16, replace this 4 with a 16, and that's going to load in my 16K 32-bit height map here. And yeah, you're just not going to be able to get that precision by creating a proxy mesh or, subdividing a mesh. I mean, you could, but you'd be dealing with like 256 million polygon mesh, and yeah, for obvious reasons, we don't want to do that. So the great thing about this workflow is it's incredibly fast because we're using the matrix object. I can get in here, and let's see here. Let's go 600 by 600 and really get a lot of these going. And you can see how performant this is still. Pretty amazing. And maybe since I'm recording a tutorial here, let's go 250 by 250. All right, that's cool. So I'm going to go back to my top view here. I'm going to stop the render view. And obviously, everything is distributed in a perfect grid. We don't want that. So we're going to bring in another effector. And to keep this relatively simple, I'm just going to do some pretty basic stuff here. We're going to bring in a random effector. And I think I'm actually going to put this before the height. So let's just call this height so we know that that's the height. And this random guy we're going to use to give it some nice variation. So I don't want to randomize it in the Y direction, but I definitely want to randomize it here in these other directions. Now we're really trying to kind of simulate, like these trees bumping into one another. So unfortunately, by default in Cinema 4D, when you use a clone or a matrix object, if you scatter a bunch of clones across an object, let's see here, there's really only there's really only one mode, and it uses kind of a noise pattern to distribute the clones. And we want it to feel more like a blue noise pattern, or we have the wonderful push apart effector that we could use, but again, we're really trying to make this optimized. And so we're just going to kind of fake that by just moving these guys apart ever so slightly by using a random effector. You can kind of see that it's already looking pretty natural. We could push it a little further, but let's see here. I don't want to go too crazy. Yeah, I think something like that looks pretty good. The other thing we could do is you can always get into the random effector and play around with these different modes. Gaussian, turbulence, I think actually turbulence is actually really nice. You can see if I crank up the scale, you can kind of see how those are moving around. Let me adjust these so we can actually visualize the turbulence here. Let me hide the terrain. Let's see here. So the scale here, you can really see this turbulence nicely. And yeah, I think this might actually be a nice way to do this. I mean, you can really get in here and randomize these however you want. Maybe maybe Gaussian's the way to go. That's looking pretty nice. You know what we could do? Let's just double this up. So we'll do effectors. We'll go random 2, even though it's called random 1. So this one we will set to be turbulence, and then let's just change these. Let's go -22, something different here, and scale this down. Now we're getting a nice kind of additional bit of randomization there, and I think for all intents and purposes this is great. So the next thing, we're going to use some of these nice data maps that come with CG terrain in order to get a better distribution of these trees or vegetation or whatever you're scattering around. So to do that, we're going to bring in another magical shader effector, and let's put this here, and we'll just call this Veg. And under the shader tab here, let's go back here and bring in this one here, O3B 4K Vegetation. Drop that in here. And right away, if I hide this, we can see that we're actually getting the color mapped onto there, which is cool. But we don't want color. We want to just hide these guys. So we can actually just check this visibility box, and that is going to remove any clones or matrix objects that are within the white values of this map. So if I go to the shading tab here, in here, I can open this window and get a better look at what we have here. So the white is supposed to kind of represent where you would have more vegetation, and the black is less. So let me fire up the render view here, and let's see what we're getting. This is already looking pretty neat. Let's see here. So we don't want color, so I'm going to just go back to the Veg shader effector, go to parameter here. Let's just turn off color for now. And yeah, guys, this is already looking pretty cool. So this is pretty much the very basic setup for getting some plants distributed onto a height map from CG terrain. So I think the next step here that I will try and do quickly, trying to keep this video not too crazy long, but it's already getting pretty lengthy. I'm going to hop over to Quixel Megascans here, and I was looking at these awesome aquatic plants here, and I thought these would be perfect. So let me just grab this guy real quick, and let's see if we can't load these up into Cinema. Let's see here. It's downloading. Nice work, internet. Let's export that to Cinema. Now we are going to get an error, and the reason for this, let me undo that. The reason for that error is we need to set this to, well, actually, we can leave it at Redshift, but if we go into our preferences and we go into the Redshift settings, we need to uncheck node materials for presets. And if we pop back over to Bridge, and let's try this again, export, successful, lovely. The reason it does that right now is because Quixel doesn't support Cinema's new nodes yet, which is a bummer, but that's okay. You can convert these right within here, but in the interest of keeping this video not too crazy long, I won't worry about that for right now. So all we have to do now, though, is we go into our matrix object tag here under particles. We're going to grab all these guys, and you can always, let's see here, lock this window so that when we deselect it, we can still grab these. It makes it a little easier to work with. Throw those into this list, get rid of the tree, proxy, and let's fire up the render view and see what we got. Holy cow, look at trees galore. I'm going to shrink this. And they're really not trees, I guess. They are some sort of sea plant. Look at that. That is just looking pretty nifty. So obviously they're too large. So I can just actually shift select all these, go to my scale tool over here. And even though I have no idea where they are here, I'm just going to start scaling them down. And we'll see how they go here. That's looking pretty cool. And yeah, we definitely need to add some randomization. So I will select my matrix object. And let's add in another random effector. And for this one, we're not going to do any position. Let's do rotation. Let's go 360 and then maybe like 2 and 2. And if we get in here, see what we got here. That's looking pretty good. And you can see like they're not like colliding a whole lot, which is great. And that's kind of the benefit of setting this up using the grid mode. And then remember, we're using the height map to get the position of these guys like perfectly on our rendered height. So this is a super powerful workflow. Now I think I should also randomize the scale while we're at it here real quick. Let's go scale as well. We'll go absolute. No, let's just go uniform and minus 0.5. And that should do it for some basic scale randomization. And yeah, guys, this is just a very quick intro on how to scatter these guys. Let me bring in a camera. Let's see here. Oh, my camera thing went away. That's another weird bug. RS. Let's type in RS camera. Double click. This is the new camera, Redshift camera, that is. Look at that. Look at that. Let's go to the matrix object here and let's crank these up. Let's go 700. Tab 70 or 700. Let it think for a second. All right, look at that. That's a lot of plants. Now obviously this is pretty quick and dirty. I'm going to scale these down a little more. Grab our scale tool with the T key. Let's scale these down quite a bit because now we got quite a few here. And so obviously you got to get in there and really kind of play around with the distribution and the scale to get it to feel pretty natural, you know, so that it feels like these things are kind of aware of one another. But yeah, guys, without making this too long, I think for the next one, I'm going to go in and show you how we can randomize the color and add some more layers and noise to kind of mess around with the distribution. One thing that is nice though is if we wanted to, we could get into our vegetation shader map here. If we add, let's say, a filter effect, we can get in here and start to play around with this guy. Like if we crank up the contrast, let's see here. Now, let's see here, since I am rendering here, I gotta disable that. And let me drop these back down to like 200. Tab 200 so that we can actually kind of work with this because in real time it's trying to calculate this. So let's see here, contrast, let's tweak the gamma. So you can see just by playing around with a filter here, we can get in here and fine tune the distribution of these guys. So, you know, just by playing with the gamma and the contrast, and actually I don't know if the contrast is doing a whole lot, but the gamma has a nice effect on, you know, the placement of all these. So just something to consider when you want to get in here. You can totally adjust these maps, you know, to do what you need. So you could, in theory, just, you know, have like different levels of vegetation, you know, trees, bushes, plants, all being driven by this one map. And you could isolate the areas that you want certain plants to be more prevalent and all that. Ooh, and one other thing, I wanted to point out that in the matrix scatter object tag at the bottom here, there is a distribution mode, forgot to change. So we definitely want to set this to random. And this will give us much better randomization of all of our objects in here. Yes, that's much nicer. So anyway, guys, yeah, this is a pretty long one, 30 minutes. Jeez, I don't know if anyone's going to watch this, but yeah, hopefully they do. I'm gonna crank this back up to 800, not 8,000, that might break it. Let's go 800 by 800. Now guys, I will say my system is pretty beefy. This is two 4090s running in here, but I mean, this is like pretty incredible performance, being able to do this right within your viewport and Redshift and everything else. But yeah guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. It's a little late here in the evening, so yeah, we'll catch you on the flip side. See you later.